In this video, we will show you how to create a dynamic collection page in WeWeb to display the data from a specific item on a dedicated page. In WeWeb, we'll create a template page that matches our design. Just like in our design, we will have placeholder information, and based on this starting point, we can start binding data to our item. So where is the data we want to display here? We have two options. Option one is that when the user starts from the My Ticket page, if they click on an item, we update an object variable with the information from the object that was clicked. So for example, we could have a workflow that changes the variable value of the selected ticket. And we would bind this to the item data. That way we would have all the information from the ticket that was selected. We would add another action to change page and redirect the user to the ticket detail page. So if I look at my variables, the selected ticket is here. If I click on this one, unable to check out, I see that the selected ticket variable has been updated with this information. And on my page, I can start binding to the information that's in my selected ticket variable. The upside of this approach is that we save a little bit of time. Instead of making an API call to our backend and waiting for its response, we simply update a local variable and display that data on our dynamic page. The downside is that if a user tries to access that URL directly without going through the My Tickets page first, and therefore not updating the variable, they will land on a page with no information because the variable will be empty. That's why in many use cases, you will want to make an API call to your backend to get the information from the specific item you want to display on the dynamic collection page. So that's what we did here. We created a collection to get the data from a single ticket, in this case, ticket ID 9. And we were able to do this because in our backend, we have an API endpoint /ticket/ticket ID, which can, and the ID can change, to get the information from that specific ticket. For testing purposes, we haven't made the ticket ID dynamic yet. We will in a second. For now, we're getting information from ticket ID 9. So on our page, we can now bind to our title that comes directly from the ticket collection, and we make sure that we're not getting it from a different collection because two collections might have the same field name. All right, title, the status, type. And we also want, if we already have information, to pre-fill this form. So we will bind the initial value, the init value, to the information we have in our database. And notice how the placeholder that we have here disappears when we bind the value. It's replaced by the value. But here for video link, watch what happens. We have this placeholder and we bind to video link, except the field is empty. Our placeholder is still displayed if the value is empty in our database. Okay, now we also need to bind the comments. And in order to bind the comments, because we can have several comments, we will look at how we design this. So this is the text. It looks like the borders and the background color are related to the text. Yes. So the element we will want to repeat is the text element. We will want to display as many text elements as there are comments related to this tickets. In order to do this, we will have to bind its parent element, so the comments container, to our list of comments, our array of comments. Because in our database, that's the value we have. We have for each ticket, we have an array or list of comments. So even when there's only one comment, it's a list. So here, I make sure I'm on the parent container of the item I want to repeat. And for items, I will say comments. Let's see. And I will bind to this here. So to my array, this is where I have my 2 comments. I will bind here, and now the text element will be repeated twice. So even though it only appears once in the navigator, now on the page I have 2 text elements. And I can bind to my data. I can also use bindings to change the style of my comments based on the color field of the comment. In our database, we chose to have the comment table separately from the tickets and reference the comments table in the tickets table, because that allows us to have more complex comment objects, including having a field dedicated to the color. So here we have 2 colors, blue or orange. And in our design, we could say that the text color will depend on this information here. So we could use the switch formula, which allows us to say, take an expression, for example, blue, and then if that variable is blue, then the value you should return should be this. If this parameter is orange, then the value you should return is orange 700. And I notice there are 2 commas in a row. There we go. So now the text is a different color because this comment has the color orange attached to it. Now I can copy this formula and use it on the background color, except instead of blue 700, I will bind to blue 50. And instead of orange 700, I will bind to orange 50. Finally, I'll paste the same formula on the borders. Because this is a border, I will add information about the border. So it will be 1 pixel. It will be a solid border. I need my space, finish my string, and concatenate. So this is the value of my border property. And it now works because it's in a format that is CSS standard. So the size of the border first, space, the style of the border, space again, and then the color of the border, which is a result of this switch formula. So now back in preview mode, we have our comments styled. We can use a similar formula on our statuses in ticket type so that they look nice. So my parameter is the status, and if the value of the status is new, I want to return this value instead. If it's in progress, I want to return this value. And if it's done, I want to return this value. And if it's info required, I want to return this value. And similar here. Now that we're happy with the design and data bindings on our page, we want to make our API call and the URL of our template page dynamic. Remember how when we set up our collection, we told our backend we wanted ticket 9? Well, we can make this dynamic as we've seen in Xano. We can request ticket ID 9, or we can request ticket ID 11. And we can do the same in WeWeb. And we can make this ID dynamic. In order to do that, on our page, on our template page, in the URL path, we can add a variable. We can name it whatever we want for consistency purposes, because we've named it ticket underscore ID in Xano. Let's call it ticket underscore ID. And the editor default value will be 9. That way we know it's test data that works. And now in our collection, instead of binding to 9, we can remove the 9. We leave the slash at the end, and we add the ticket ID parameter of our template page. So currently it's 9. And the last thing we want to do is go back to the tickets page, and on the ticket, link to our ticket page and bind the ticket ID, the parameter, the dynamic parameter that will change based on the ticket that is selected, and pass it the ID of the current item. Now, if I go to preview mode and I select this one, hard to pronounce, if I click here, I am now redirected to this page where I don't have a lot of information, so a lot of placeholders. There's a video link, but I can see it's the correct ticket with the correct title, no comments. And if I go to my collection, now the ticket ID is 25 because the URL was dynamic, so I was able to get the information from this ticket. That's it. That's how you can create a dynamic collection page in WeWeb. The key takeaway, there are 2 approaches to do this. One with a workflow that updates an object variable, and one with an API call on page load to fetch the selected item. Both have their pros and cons. You decide what is best for your user's experience.